As most people on this side of the culture war know, Fandom Pulse is an unfortunate ally, one who wears the veneer of cooperation all so they can push a much more insidious agenda behind the guise of supporting the anti-woke movement, when in reality they are the definition of what we once feared from the right. They are a bunch of hyper-pious and hypocritical fools who want to use right-wing propaganda as a way to push Christian extremism, and not in the good kind. Instead, one that flexes extreme control over anyone who doesn't want to conform to what they desire. And this is utterly clear in a ton of Fandom Pulse articles, such as any time they talk about anything homosexual or anything of the like. And most recently, they've decided to go after a few people they call too centrist. They are going after Grummz, Smash JT, and Asmongold, who, in my opinion, are some of the most important people when it comes to this culture war fight. They really are the ones who embody the most important aspects. Smash JT, Grummz, and Asmongold were normies. They were people who did not care, who were forced to care, especially Asmongold. I've said it before, Asmongold is one of the most important figures to ever exist because he was a normal guy forced to care about culture. He was a normal person who just wanted to play World of Warcraft, and he got tired of all the ugly lesbians clogging up his game, and so he had to say something. Asmongold isn't a right-wing pundit, he's a normal person forced to have an opinion that he didn't want to have. And I've seen similar trends with Smash JT and Grummz. Though Grummz is always in the industry, his position as an anti-woke gamer did start with the original Gamergate, but it doesn't really look like a chosen path that he had to take. Instead, it's one that was thrust upon him, as with most people. The path we are on was thrust upon us because something we cared about was destroyed. Evangelicized. And I use the word evangelicized specifically because the left wing and these extremists at Fandom Pulse both want to evangelize their religions. And both of them are following an extremely dogmatic religion. Fandom Pulse are not Christians. No, they are some kind of something else. They are Gnostics who wish to force their Gnostic power onto us and demand that we follow through with their perceived notion of morality. One that is not rooted in reality or scripture, as they like to abuse the words of God and take the Lord's name in vain to support their arguments when they really have none. So before going further, like, subscribe, and let's get into this. So the first area where they really screw up is this article, Pragmatism Over Principle, the Failure of Anti-Woke Influencers, where they point out three key people who I've already mentioned, Smash JT, Asmongold, and Grummz, where they really go all in on them. And of course, to make it all better, they have to reference the internet's favorite wife-beater, John Del Arroz, who recently asked how can anti-woke influencers suddenly voice support for gay marriage and transgender issues, and yet their audiences just go along with it. After all, wasn't opposing these things exactly what they claim to stand for? Now, I'd like to know which of these three men, or other kinds of anti-woke influencers, have gone out there and made statements in support of transgender ideology. But, you know, most people who watch me know I'm bisexual, so I'm very open about my support for gay marriage. The problem isn't an issue of support for gay marriage, or kindness towards transgender people. What we're fighting against is an institutionalized agenda, one that forces these facts down our throat, one that tells us that we must affirm or we are committing murder. That's what we oppose. We oppose forced ideology, similar to the forced ideology that you wish to shove down our throats, Fandom Pulse. That's what we're targeting. That's what we're espousing against. Not the existence, but more the forced and required aspect of these things. It's when everything is being forced to be gay or trans or non-binary. It's when they're taking characters who have long since been straight and changing their sexuality. It's when they're making it so we have to engage with it at all times. As a bisexual person, I don't like gay characters on screen because they're often poorly written and only there to serve the purpose of propagandizing. That's their sole purpose. We don't want that. If there's a character who just happens to be bisexual that exists, fantastic! But at no point do we want them to be forced, and that's what we're fighting is forced representation. And to the point of what has changed, what exactly they claim to stand for, to Fandom Pulse, the answer is simple: nothing has truly changed. In 2024, so-called anti-woke movement was never rooted in conviction. It was pragmatic. These voices oppose woke ideology. Watch what you say, Fandom Pulse. Throw stones in glass houses. These voices oppose woke ideology only because it touched their wallets or their statuses. Let he who has not sinned cast the first stone. They were never standing upon God's word, so as the winds shift, when the pragmatic incentives change, they simply return to where they truly belong from the start. This person at Fandom Pulse, what was this guy's name? What the Egad is claiming that Smash JT, Asmongold, and Grummz only hold these positions because it is what is financially advantageous. Do you truly believe Smash JT wouldn't get better viewership or make more money if he was espousing the mainstream narrative? Do you think Grummz benefited from losing work because of his right-wing positions? Do you think Asmongold is at the benefit of constantly having to be afraid of Twitch banning him because he voices opinions that are right-wing or centrist? If it was all about money, he would be just like Hassan Piker, talking about how he has the people's Porsche. It's not about money, it's about values. And just because the values aren't rooted in your dusty old book, one which I plan to read soon, stay tuned for that, then you can't claim that they're invalid. Believe it or not, people with an IQ above 125 can actually formulate their own morality without some dusty old book telling them what to believe. Just because you need God to formulate your morality does not mean that's true for everyone. And sure, it's probably true for most people, but not for everyone. And more importantly, as the winds have shifted further right-wing because the world is healing back to centrism, these people haven't been backpedaling. They haven't been hiding. They haven't been shifting the goalposts back towards leftism. None of that's been there. They may have opened a bit of an acceptance, a bit more tolerance, because now it's being reduced to the amount that exists. Gay people make up approximately 7% of the population, so with about 7% of games being targeted towards gay people, that's okay. Especially when they have a 7% of the budget. That's fine. Games targeted towards that demographic are perfectly normal. Games like Date Everything make complete sense in a market that is so expansive, but it's when every game is being forced to be like it that it's actually an issue. And then, of course, he comes out and he throws a lot of scripture. As a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Without repentance and faith, the heart cannot be transformed. A man may give up greater sin for a time, but he will cling to others and eventually return to all of them. Such as your sin of pride, for taking the Lord's word and pretending you know exactly what it means, for casting and espousing accusations against men who do not deserve them. Those don't seem like very Christ-like traits to me. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matter of the law, justice and mercy and faith, those you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Matthew 23:23. It's really ironic for this side of the aisle to be casting stones of hypocrisy, for it to be calling out these things. After all, we know John Del Arroz has a bit of a rap sheet. John F Trent is known to like to yiff Lucarios, which are Pokemon, and everyone's favorite Melanie Mac is known for selling sex. Not literally sex, of course, she's not a prostitute, but she does wear skimpy outfits and reveal quite some nice cleavage as a way to boost her numbers amongst young men. And then she comes out here and criticizes when games do the same thing. It's rules for thee, not for me, in the most classic of sense. And to be clear, what John F. Trent does, what Melanie Mac does, those are fine. You're allowed to do that. But you can't do that and scream from the rooftops that everyone else doing it is evil. Likewise, today's culture warriors may oppose drag queen story hour or the mutilation of children, but when pressed, they will still form the root of rebellion, the celebration of homosexuality, the rejection of God's created order of male and female, and a worship of self. A strong focus amongst all of the centrist and anti-woke gamers is heavily focused on anti-hedonism, violating a lot of the hedonistic rules. Sure, we might like some Gooner games. I personally don't, but you're welcome to love Gooner games. But Gooner games in of themselves isn't pure hedonism. There's other joy to be grabbed from there. This isn't a worship of self, this is still a worship of something else and higher order. And a false conflation of comparing homosexuality and drag queen story hour or the mutilation of children. Believe it or not, most gay people oppose the prior two. He then references Romans 1:25, that at the heart of adultery is the exchanging the truth of God for the lie, the worshipping of serving the creature rather than creator. Whether it takes the form of rainbow flags or corporate diversity slogans, the underlying sin is the same, man setting himself above God. And as Paul warns in verse 28, when people refuse to retain God in their knowledge, he gives them over to a debased mind that approves and applauds what he condemns. Where? I just want to know, where has Smash JT, Asmongold, or Grummz done any of this? What have they placed above God in hierarchy? What have they placed above the perceived God in hierarchy? What have they put above anything else? What have they valued above your claim for adultery? Where have they espoused support of rainbow flags and serving any creature rather than the creator? I don't know what these men's religious tone is, but there are ways to worship God without directly worshiping him. There are ways to respect him without putting things above him. And you claim that they put rainbow flags above it? I don't think any of these men are particularly fond of the rainbow flag, and I could be talking out my ass for all I know, but where I'm standing now, it seems pretty clear. You are making up baseless accusations to push your anger that they don't support you wholeheartedly. And here he shows his sleeve a little too well. Pragmatism without Christ will always fail. Man can oppose the excess of sin while still embracing sin itself. Only the gospel of Jesus Christ can give new eyes to see, new ears to hear, and new heart that does not return to vomit, but instead runs to the living God. Nice callback to your vomit quote from earlier, but this still is not true. I do not live in sin because I'm not a Christian. Sure, by not believing in Christ and by being attracted to men, I live in some sin, but who does not? As Christ says, let he who has not sinned cast the first stone. And yet here you are espousing plenty of stones while committing your own sins, of judging your neighbor and not the sin, by refusing all of these different good wills that Christ tells you to embody. And yet you cast baseless assertions against your neighbor. You are literally bearing false one of the 10 commandments, the 9th commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And what you are doing is you are bearing false witness against them. You are actively making a statement that does not align with anything that they themselves have said. You are claiming they hold beliefs that they have never once espoused. And without evidence, this is one of the most severe sins you can commit. Congratulations. Now, the follow-up article to this directly criticizes Smash AT, calling Smash AT in the quiet drift to Gamergate 2.0. And here we have where this goes from just being a complaint in general to direct slander, direct assault against one of the most important people in counterculture gaming. This is the man who sways so many others, and most of what you criticize him for are exactly why he is so effective. Same with Asmongold. You are attacking a man who has committed much of his life, much of the last 5 years, to fighting this culture war nonsense, and yet you accuse him of being nothing more than a pundit and a grifter, all because you disagree with how far he wants to go. This article starts out innocuously enough, calling out different games that have all failed. Last of Us 2, Gotham Knights, Forspoken, Goodbye Volcano High. No one's even heard of that game, but okay. Starfield, Dustborn, Dragon Age the Veilguard, games that all flop because of wokeism. And then he moves on to moderation as dilution, calling out Smash JT for not being an extremist, which is actually his biggest strength. Jim, formerly known as Internet Aristocrat, and later Mr. Medicure, diagnosed the decay early. In now archived video, he lamented, "The whole Gamergate thing is depressing. It was an opportunity to finally kick the teeth in of social justice warriors and Tumblr-rettes. And for a while it was working really, really well. All you had to do was attack. People think you need to be a moderate or an independent or neutral. They're wrong. You need to pick an extreme. If you try to approach the middle to appeal to moderates, you become indistinguishable from them and your message becomes diluted." This wasn't just a tactical critique, it was a spiritual one. Gamergate's original potency lay in its refusal to compromise, its willingness to name names and burn bridges, but the moment it sought respectability, it became a shadow of itself. No, it did not become a shadow of itself. What it did is it had to secure support from the actual agency. Gamergate is a great movement, but it means nothing if we do not have support of the general population. By appealing to normalcy, by appealing to moderation, we are talking to those who are afraid to join our side. A common issue I have with my liberal friends is that none of them want to be conservative because conservatives are innately rude. Not all of them, of course, but the ones who scare them away. Every time I try to convince somebody that conservatism or centrism is the appropriate way to live, they quickly find some Republican neocon complaining that the age of consent is too high. They find a neocon bitching that we have to restore religious moral order and aggressively shame anyone who doesn't follow through. And while I do agree religion might need to be back in store for the average population, we don't need to do it by establishing a moral order. Extremism does not breed cooperation, it breeds contempt. When you push an extremist counter view, you then breed people to be afraid of your message. If you want to be effective, you must reach out to them on a moderate field. That's how the left won. The left got where they are through the foot in the door approach. Hey, what if we just don't say retard? Hey, what if we just don't say faggot? Hey, what if we just don't use gay as a prerogative? What if we XYZ and now it's, if you don't affirm you're committing murder, is because they secured all the small wins. We too must achieve small wins to get big victories. You must win the battle to win the war. And here's where he starts to get a little too accusatory. Enter Smash JT. His channel, often recommended alongside anti-woke content, seemed at first glance to be part of the resistance. He spoke about Sweet Baby Inc., criticized wokeness in gaming, and gestured toward the same frustration many shared. So far true and so far fair. In a video post back in October 2024 called The Future of Metroid is in Serious Doubt, there Jeff gives a brief introduction to the franchise and says, Metroid is one of the greatest video game series of all time, and if you haven't played it, you owe it to yourself to at least try it out. Sorry Smash, I'm letting you down. Because not only has it had groundbreaking mechanics and new ways to play, creating literally an entire genre of gaming just based off of the name alone, it also featured a female protagonist, and being one of the first games in history to do such a thing, bringing it to such prominence. The last line about female protagonists being brought to prominence, yeah, that might seem innocuous, but it is a tell. It is a celebration, a subtle endorsement of the very representational logic that undergrinds the woke aesthetic. Here, Samus isn't being praised for her lore or for her narrative arc. No, she is praised for being a woman, for bringing it to prominence. This is bad faith. This is the definition of a bad faith argument. And let's be very clear. Smash AT isn't saying Samus' importance is that she's a woman. Especially he's praising Metroid for its accomplishments, for the fact that it brought in new mechanics, that it literally helped invent the Metroidvania style of gameplay, with Metroid and Castlevania creating the loop that is the most influential loop in gameplay history. So he's not saying the importance of Metroid is just that it happens to have a woman as the protagonist. No, the importance is that it is literally one of the most important games ever made. Hands down. And the fact it has a woman in it is just an extra benefit, an extra cherry on top for its excellence. And no, Smash JT isn't stealing woke logic and woke terminology. No, the woke side stole that terminology. Smash JT is using these phrases correctly, and just because it might have the veneer of wokeness doesn't mean it is woke. The image of an angel isn't always an angel. Instead, the woke side stole the terminology. They stole praising a game for being the first to have a female protagonist. They stole that appreciation. Instead, Smash AT is reclaiming what is actually worth celebrating. It is the language of the woke regime only because the woke regime appropriated the language, not because it is innately woke. And here we just have a lie, a legitimate lie. To understand the betrayal here, one must understand Samus Aran. Her femininity was never the point, it was the twist. The fact only revealed itself after you had beaten the game. Samus wasn't designed to bring female protagonists to prominence, her sex was entirely incidental. Just framing rewrites his history and retrofits Samus into representational mold, turning her into a banner for progress rather than a cipher for challenge. In doing so, he gratifies the woke agenda. Granted, this is not through overt advocacy, but through subtle re-narration. At no point did Smash AT, in the section you provided, praise the game for inventing female protagonists. He praises the character for being different, sure. He mentions the fact that it is a woman, and is one of the games that brought female protagonists to light, sure. But at no point does he say Metroid's value is in its wokeness, in its proto-leftist ideology. No, at no point does he make that claim. And you calling the fact that Samus is a woman a cipher for challenge. My brother in Christ, what are you smoking? Did you accidentally put marijuana in your incense? If I praise Lara Croft for being one of the big foundations of female protagonists, that's not woke to say so. That's an actual praise of the game. Lara Croft is one of the best protagonists ever created, one of the most foundational protagonists ever created, and she's a woman. And I can praise her for being a woman, for having nice triangular tits. I'm allowed to say that, and that's perfectly acceptable to do. This was my first look at the new face of ideological drift. Not the loud activist, but the quieter reframer. The YouTuber who critiques wokeness while internalizing its grammar. The commentator who outwardly resists the aesthetic but adopts the premise. Maybe because the premise isn't bad. The premise of equality, the premise of equal rights is not a bad premise. The problem is, the left took the premise and abused it. The premise wasn't the problem, it was the application. It was the fact that they took women empowerment to mean male degradation. The fact that they took leftist language and equality and meant supremacy. That's the problem. It isn't the language, it isn't the premise, it isn't the origin. That is a naturalistic fallacy. The problem is that how they used it was to attack, was to degrade. They took these positive premises and used them as an attack. That was the issue. These traits in moderation are beyond fine. There's nothing wrong with it in moderation, yet here you are attacking moderation as a premise, when the Bible itself calls for moderation. Jeff's attempts to play the centrist arbiter while implicitly endorsing those he claimed to resist. He wants to be the adult in the room. He wants to be the voice of reason, the bridge between the religious right and the progressive left. But in doing so, he constructs a false dichotomy, one that obscures the real ideological battle at the heart of gaming culture. His article, A New Challenge Appears, Religion. Gunnergate explained his riddled with slippery language and moral evasions. Reveals not a principled stance, but a posture of rhetorical self-preservation. Well, here we see a major issue. Smash JT isn't aiming to bridge the gap between the right and the left. No, he's trying to appeal to the centrists, those who are emotionally and ideologically checked out. Those are the ones who matter the most and are the most important people to target in this culture war, because they are the ones with most of the sway, and they are the ones who decide whether or not the culture actually shifts. His stance as a moderate, whether or not he is a moderate, is irrelevant, but his stance as a moderate is not to appeal to both sides, but to appeal to the uninterested middle, those who do not care. By appealing kindly, you do not turn those off. By appealing kindly, you do not turn off those who do not want to be involved. But instead of painting this as an epistemic and nihilistic end to their hobby, he is able to attract people who would never dream of entering the counterculture space, and that now that they're here, they are now on our side. Whereas people like you, Fandom Pulse, and I've seen it, I have seen people in anti-woke spaces say, you know, I was almost convinced, and then I saw John F Trent tweet, and now I've been convinced that maybe I was right in the beginning, and that the counterculture space is actually wrong. Extremists chase people away, not bring them in. Most of us who are in the counterculture space, we're moderates, we're centrists, who were pushed away. That meme where it is, you disagree with one thing, push, why are you over there with them? That created a lot of us counterculturalists. We were put here because the extremists pushed us out, and now you are asking to do the same thing. You are an extremist begging to push out those who actually have the ability to affect anything. And this is where Phantom Pulse just has to strawman a boogeyman into existence. As Smash JT was quoted, the gaming industry has been no stranger to cultural battles. The community has fought back hard to preserve creative freedom. What community? Because the one that fought back wasn't a vague coalition, it was a hardline resistance to ideological capture. But I'll agree, community isn't quite the accurate term, it implies communistic biases. We're not really a community, we're more a collection of people with similar interests. We aren't a community, we are just a bunch of people who all have common sense. And it was that common sense pushback that prevented ideological capture. Not extremism, not a hardline resistance. Hogwarts Legacy did not become the best-selling game from Warner Bros. In over a decade because of an ideological hardline resistance. No, it did it by being a good game. Dragon Age the Veilguard didn't fail because it's a woke disaster. It failed because it's poorly written. And people know when they're being propagandized to, and they resist being propagandized. It is a natural failing of people with standards, not some hardline resistance. You are giving 80% of the work to 20% of the people. And it's just simply not true. And now we get a beginning of poisoning the well. Ever wondered why so many speedrunners and Smash tournament players inevitably tune out? The answer is because of ostensible gaming culture is fragmented and self-sabotaging. No, that's simply untrue. It's like asking, do you wonder why everybody who drinks becomes an alcoholic? You're implying a slippery slope and a causation that is not there. In reality, the people who are likely to tune out, mentally ill, shut-ins, who do not have any social skills and might be autistic or suffer from other mental disorders, are going to tune out and are going to be the ones who likely are to speedrun and engage in Smash tournaments. You're looking at two things that have a third correlator. The correlator is not gaming. It is not transness. The correlator is mental illness and low self-esteem and poor living conditions. That thing, the self-esteem, mental illness, and poor living conditions will branch out and create both transness and gaming obsession. This is like looking at people who escaped Chernobyl and now have cancer. And it'd be like saying escaping Chernobyl causes cancer when you fail to consider that radiation levels cause the escape and causes the cancer. But because you are ignoring the actual cause, you're saying leaving Chernobyl causes cancer. That's what you've done. That is the false dichotomy that you have laid out. That is the fallacious statement you have made. And it is utterly ridiculous to have done so. Movements like Gamergate, though initially aiming to challenge corruption, ultimately undermine themselves through chaotic tactics, giving opponents easy leverage. Gamergate was a testament to culture lacking unity, credibility, or any coherent set of shared values. Attempts to unify have failed. Every movement born out of frustration, be it Gamergate or something else, has collapsed under its own contradictions. Rage without discipline becomes spectacle, and spectacle inevitably becomes justification for the very forces it claims to oppose. You are really one to talk. As was mentioned earlier with Goonergate, which I think comes up later again, I might be wrong. Goonergate itself was you causing a spectacle to feed the opposition. Goonergate literally cost us a lot of effort in the ideological space, because you had to throw a tantrum over an anti-woke game having a sexy protagonist. And what that did was make it look like, and I've seen people argue this, you made it look like all anti-woke gamers are puritanical psychopaths. I saw people who were kind of centrist attack all anti-woke gamers on the premise of Goonergate. That was your fault, and you cost us momentum because of your ideological capture. Our victories are internal, our defeats are public. Yes, the internal victory was casting you out for your extremist and hypocritical views, and the defeat was because people thought what you believe reflects what I believe. You cost us far too much goodwill with your little spectacles. So how about you go and project elsewhere and not onto Smash JT? And then, of course, he continues into the centrist contradiction. Jeff's coverage implies disagreement. He gestures towards frustration, he critiques outcomes, but he's never even taken a hard stance on anything except vague personal preference. Gaming's about escapism, creativity, and enjoyment. What's wrong with that? Yes, it is. And no, he doesn't have to take a hard line exception. And also, if you watched his live streams, you'd see he takes significantly stronger exceptions. I watched the Smash JT live stream and was like, whoa, this is not the same guy whose articles I go to for videos. And now you're going to try and frame the statement gaming is about escapism, creativity, enjoyment, and you poison the well more with a slippery slope. This preference masquerading as principle, and it's easily flipped. A progressive could just as easily say, my escapism involves playing as a non-binary character who announces their identity at the dinner table. Objectively, is this preference wrong? Besides citing personal preference, why doesn't this belong in the industry? Okay, you cannot be this. I'll be nice. I'll be kind. The problem here is that we are making this escapism that belongs to 1% of the population, and it's in 100% of games. The issue is not that this exists. Let's be very clear. Dragon Age the Veilguard, what's inside of that game can exist. The problem is that it existed in Dragon Age. That's the issue. The problem is that it existed in a game that cost $300 million to make. That's the issue. The problem is that it existed in a AAA game. That's the issue. If all of the stuff in Dragon Age the Veilguard was in an indie game, made for an indie audience, at an indie price, at an indie cost, nobody would care. Nobody would complain. The problem isn't that it exists. The problem is where it exists. Date Everything is fine, because that game probably cost only a couple $1,000s to make and was made by a small team and cost $30. Dragon Age the Veilguard is not fine because it cost $400 million to make, had a team of several hundred people, took 5 years to be developed, and cost $80. That's the problem. That's the dichotomy. Do you understand? Telling developers what they should or shouldn't make puts you on the same slippery slope as the forced censorship, which is a Jeff claim. And then Stephanopoulos comes back with, but this entire channel critiques the AAA industry regularly. Why talk about it all if we're supposed to remain neutral? If moralizing is off the table, then why should anyone care about his personal preferences? Well, but that's the issue. We aren't telling you what you can and can't make. We're only saying where you shouldn't be doing it. We're not moralizing to them. We're pointing out the fact that what they're doing is a dumb idea. And sure, we may ideologically disagree as well, but the issue, as I said, isn't that it exists, it's where you're putting it. This is the fatal contradiction. Jeff's objective moral principles is not to enforce moral objective principles. He fails to recognize the irony of that stance. Jeff invokes the ESBR when he says if a game company wants to make sex have a nude model raging party game, they'll have to deal with the ESRB. So moral regulation is fine so long as it's institutional. Jeff invokes the ESRB as a safeguard against games slipping into the sex abyss, implying that its oversight is somehow neutral or objective. But the ESRB is not a metaphysical entity. It is an institution run by people, and people make decisions based on what they believe is appropriate. That means the ESRB standards are not value-free. They expressions of moral judgment shaped by cultural norms, political pressures, and yes, personal beliefs. So here we see Fanapulse accusing Smash JT of a appeal to authority fallacy, but this does come off as a bit of a fallacy, does it not? In reality, yes, the ESRB is not perfect, but it generally does a good enough job of labeling when games are overtly sexy. When it comes to the argument as to whether or not there's too much sex in the game, the ESRB is a trustworthy source. Furthermore, you are appealing to non-metaphysical entities to bash Smash JT for not having a metaphysical entity. You claim that you get your morality from the church, but the church is not a metaphysical entity. Even the Bible is not a metaphysical entity. You may agree with it, you may think it's derived from metaphysical entities, but it in of itself is not a metaphysical entity, not to mention the fact it is a translation. So you have all these complaints about ESRB and other stances that are equally applicable to your own argument. So what's the difference between the ESRB drawing a line and a religious critic doing the same? Nothing, except that one wears a badge of institutional legitimacy and the other speaks from conviction. Are you saying that the ESRB people aren't speaking from conviction? How can you possibly claim that if you don't actually know where they're coming from? And the ESRB was made for conviction. It was made by Christian advocacy groups. Do you not realize, and I know that's a bit of a naturalistic fallacy, but do you not realize that their conviction comes from the same place your conviction comes from the same book, comes from the same agency? Also, you do rely on the church, which is an institution, to judge some of your morality. You are being hypocritical here again. Fandom Pulse then labels the myth of the free market. Let the market dictate success. Historically, it's always worked, which is a Jeff quote, which is vaguely libertarianistic. That is true. And then Fandom Pulse goes on to say, this is demonstrably false. And then he proceeds to list a bunch of how the market decided. Black Isle Studios' Fallout Planescape tournament closed in 2003 due to Interplay's financial collapse. The market decided that you were bad with your money. Oh no! Lionhead Studios' Fable Black and White shut down by Microsoft in 2016 after canceling Fable Legends. The market decided they didn't want the studio. Oh no! All of these are lists of how the market decided. I mean, Bizarre Creations, a Project Gotham Racing Geometry Wars closed by Activision in 2011 after Blur underperformed. The market decided it didn't want it. This isn't the one you literally just proved Smash JT's claim. Furthermore, now let us look at how mediocrity thrives. Bethesda games, the market requests those Bethesda games. The Electronic Arts, despite releasing underwhelming titles like Anthem, Battlefield 2042, and Need for Speed Unbound, EA remains one of the most profitable publishers in the world? Yes, because the market decides that's what they want. The market deciding is not the same thing as quality. It is not the same thing as a product being good. The market can want a subpar product. I love me some Bethesda slop. That is the market deciding. So thank you for proving him correct. And then this is where it gets the best. The necessity of moral clarity. Let's test Jeff's principles. Freedom of expression in art is paramount. Let's imagine a game called Auschwitz Simulator. Now, I'm going to say it up front, and this might sound like poison in the well, but it's not. This is a bad argument entirely. This is one of the worst arguments I've ever seen. It involves slippery slopes, poisoning the wells, ad hominems, false dichotomies. If this thing is riddled to the brim with fallacy, I could not conceive of all the fallacies in play. So let's get into his hypothetical. Let's imagine a game called Auschwitz Simulator, where the player assumes the role of Rudolf Haas, orchestrating the logistics of mass murder at a Nazi death camp. Sounds compelling, doesn't it? Would this be appropriate? Should it be made? Should it be sold? If your answer is no, then you've already rejected the idea of that freedom of expression is absolute. You've acknowledged that some content is morally indefensible regardless of artistic intent or market demand. So there's his moralizing, there's his setup, there is his claim. And now is where all the fallacies fall in, aside from his moralization. And if you answer yes, then one can argue you've embraced nihilistic view of art, one where you've turned killing Jews at a concentration camp into entire entertainment, and any moral discernment is thereby sacrificed on the altar of creative license. So he's poisoned the well by accusing you of being nihilistic. He has created a straw man that says that entertainment and any moral discernment is thereby sacrificed at the altar of creative license. That is a straw man. Nobody is claiming that. And let's be very clear. There's nothing wrong with the game he laid out. It might be bad taste, it might be unfavorable, but there's nothing morally apprehensive about it. You might not want to play this game, and I'd understand why. You might personally find this game distasteful, and I would respect that. But you can't say it's a bad game by nature. I mean, Sex with Hitler is a game. Sex with Furry Hitler has like 5 entries into it, and I have no problem with that game existing because it was made by like one person and cost $5 on Steam. Furthermore, when you watch Inglourious Bastards, is some of your enjoyment not based in watching the Nazis doing some Nazi shit? Is watching the main villain of Inglourious Bastards not an enjoyable thing to watch? And also, you're claiming that playing this game is endorsing Nazi beliefs. Is that true in any way, shape, or form? Are you a Nazi because you're playing a game that happens to feature them? In a recent X post, Jeff has stated, create what you want and expect criticism. So if everyone loves the Nazi Death Camp game, the market has spoken. I'm certain there are plenty of people who would approve of this game, although they might be hesitant to say it so aloud. And there's your moral framework. Ladies and gentlemen, let us create an artistic world that offers no guidance, no boundaries, no standard by which to say this is wrong. And here you are claiming people do not have agency. You have completely denied all of the agency that somebody could hold. Congratulations. So you don't believe in free will? You don't believe that God has given us the ability to determine what is right and wrong for ourselves? There is a moral framework to decide. It's called our personal moral frameworks. And if we decide that this is what we want, so be it. Can you personally tell me why this game is wrong? I would love to hear what reason is there to say that this Nazi Death Camp game is actually morally wrong. Please provide me an answer. Point being, a culture cannot be stewarded by shrugs. It requires conviction. It requires the courage to say that some things should not be made, should not be played, should not be normalized. Otherwise, your entire platform is rendered morally inert. If we had that standard, we wouldn't have most of the things we want. If we had that standard, Sydney Sweeney would not be showing off how great her jeans are behind me right now. If we had that standard, I wouldn't have access to Mortal Kombat, one of the greatest franchises ever made. If we had that standard, Deus Ex franchise could never be made. Grand Theft Auto would never have been made. By you morally posturing what can make art, you are saying that all these great productions should never have been made. Do you have an issue with C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters because it dares to appeal to demonic morality, to try and highlight what demons would believe? That is a book that has been banned before for it. All because the thing it's arguing against you find to be morally apprehensive. Jeff Sencha's posture is not a virtue, it's a liability. In a culture where neutrality is complicity, and Jeff has made his position unmistakable. You've now made the leftist argument: if you are not endorsing people, you are committing genocide. That is what you have done. You have said Smash JT is directly responsible for all of the wokeisms in the world because he dares to be reasonable and measured. Now, I'm not a measured person because I don't want to be. I find it fun to be more extremist and more contrarian. Smash JT, however, wants to earn the ear of the common man. He wants to find the normal man out there. Well, that's more side-scrollers, but Smash JT works with them. He wants to find the ear of the normal man and appeal to it. He wants to persuade the average person, the average man. That's his target. His target isn't the choir. He's not preaching to those who already believe him, who already listen to him. He's preaching to those who are undecided. He is doing far more important work than your moral posturing could ever pretend to do. Because what you are doing is chasing people away from our cause, where Smash JT is getting them where it matters, where they can relate and where they can feel actual understanding and feel like they belong here. I wasn't persuaded to leave the left wing because of an extremist position. I was persuaded to leave the left and become anti-woke because I watched Midnight's Edge Toxic Femininity. One day after I was burnt out of hearing about toxic masculinity, I watched that live stream like, oh, maybe I belong here. Not because they were rude or transgressive or pious individuals, but because they were honest and flawed, and they offered the exact same kind of benefit that Smash JT is offering. They are offering nuance. They are offering a position that I can relate to. And that's going to lead me down the pipeline of seeing other things. Yes, it is a pipeline, and it starts with somebody who is agreeable, who is moderated, and who is in the center. And that makes Smash JT one of the most important people for waking anyone up ideologically, by appealing to normalcy and appealing to a moral standard. He can attract far more people than if he screamed from the rooftops and threatened to throw me off of them. If not by now, then just like what happened 10 years ago, most will realize the ostensible Gamergate 2.0 died in the same manner as its predecessor, and this didn't happen because the opposition was too strong, but because the resistance was too soft and fake. The moderates, those who grifted the movement without ever picking a side, killed it. Odd. It seems to me we're doing just fine. With Smash JT primed to win his lawsuit, with people like Hypnotic having unbelievably high subscriber counts, with Asmongold being the #1 Twitch streamer. You can't make the claim we're losing. You can't, in good faith, make the claim that these morally centrist people are costing us the battle, when it's only when people like you run your mouths do we risk losing any ground. We didn't lose Gamergate 1 because we didn't scream loud enough. In fact, one could argue we lost Gamergate 1 because we screamed too loud. We went after inconsequential battles when they went for the industry. The left won Gamergate 1 by targeting institutions, by going at the higher place instead of starting from the bottom where we started from the bottom. And now that they've already captured the industry, it is up to us to overturn that by targeting the bottom like we did before. We do not have the same opposition because the opposition actually has something to lose now. Your moral grandstanding and your desire to insult, target, and harass is not going to work because we've seen the other side. We know what is actually at stake and what the cost is. And there's a very specific reason that I have the Hunchback of Notre Dame playing behind me. Because you, Fandom Pulse, are Frollo. You are a pious and fervent man who believes he is worshiping God when he is only worshiping himself and his ideology. You are captured by lust and sin, lust for power, lust for those to join you. You are completely encapsulated by greed and a desire for people to pay your money instead of giving it to Smash AT. You are completely enslaved to the 7 deadly sins, and it shows. And you will be condemned to hell if you continue down this pathway, just as Frollo was. And I don't mean hell as in the metaphysical hell, I mean a personal, lifelong, lived hell, where you are abandoned by your friends and enemies alike because you decided to moralize to us. You decided to shame us for being in a position that actually matters, for trying to push things forward. You attacked us first, and now you get to see what happens when you throw stones in glass houses. But that's pretty much all I've got. For those who are aware, I'm currently reading Screwtape Letters, and I will actually be doing a series about Screwtape Letters on this channel once I finish the book, where I'll be going through the letters and explaining how they're used by both leftists and evangelical hypocrites alike. And then I'll be going and starting to read the Bible, where I'll be going through it as a secularist, seeing how it can be applied to secularist life to improve it. If that stuff sounds interesting to you, subscribe, follow, comment, do whatever you want to do. I'm not your dad. And I will see you guys on the next one.